Hello, Western U 3rd and 4th years. This is Cheyenne Burnett speaking. This is the first ever Western U SAVMA vlog. I'm making this an attempt to see if it is a more effective means of getting information to you while you're out on rotation and keeping you informed. One of the things we definitely get a lot of questions about from students that are off campus is wanting more clarification on representation within the student AVMA and the AVMA. So I'm going to go through some information about the governance of both the student AVMA and the AVMA in hopes that this will be helpful to you. So a little bit about the student AVMA governance. They have their own student AVMA executive board. They have monthly conference calls. That's how they do the majority of their work. And they have 8 voting members. Their executive president presides. She also presides over the SAVMA House of Delegates when they meet twice a year at the SAVMA Symposium and at the AVMA Convention. The House of Delegates itself is made up of a senior and a junior delegate from each of the student chapters, and they make up 7 committees. Both of our delegates are on the Education and Professional Development Committee. One of their major charges is to work on grading and approving scholarships and grants for veterinary students, which is important to all of us because all of us need money for school. Another important thing is that the student AVMA, of course, is under the parent association of the AVMA itself. And the AVMA vice president, Dr. Threffall, and AVMA staff advisor, Dr. Derek Hall, and Teresa DeCarli are all present during the House of Delegates proceedings. And then, of course, the charitable arm of the American Veterinary Medical Foundation is involved, and they're really big in making scholarships and grants for veterinary students. So for our chapter of the student AVMA, our delegates are our voice within the House of Delegates when they meet biannually. And the SAVMA president, who's currently Elise Ackley, is our voice to the executive board of the AVMA. She does not have a voting seat. However, Dr. Walter Threffall, who is the vice president of the AVMA, does have a voting seat, and he is president of all the House of Delegate proceedings, and he is a major advocate for students. So when you're in school, the goal of our chapter is to keep the students as informed as possible as to what's going on the national level. So one of the reasons that I'm making these vlogs in the hopes that this will be more helpful to you than the meeting minutes have been, since the feedback that we have received is that that's not really getting you the level of information that you need. And our California Veterinary Medical Representative represents us at the state level. That's Jessica Brown. She will be going to the House of Governors this weekend, so she will have an update for us soon as to what's going on at the California level within veterinary medicine. So for our delegates that we have 1 junior and 1 senior. Currently our senior delegate is Mark Ledesma, and our junior delegate is Corey Kerr. Corey will become the senior delegate 1 day before symposium this year, and both of them are representatives of our student body. And that's really important because that's really our voice within the House of Delegates. And so whenever we have any questions or concerns for the student AVMA, they are the people we really need to be talking to because they represent us there. So what is the House of Delegates exactly? It is the legislative body of the student AVMA, and its purpose is to make professional policies for students within organized veterinary medicine and provides direction for matters relating to students. One example of this is the veterinary leadership experience. Some of our students have attended that. Dr. Charles is heavily involved with it. And one thing that came up last year is for some reasons that don't involve the student AVMA, the AVMA decided to pull funding from VLE. And this issue was brought up at the House of Delegates, and the student AVMA House of Delegates voted in favor of continuing the funding that we provide to VLE because it is important for students. So the major responsibilities of delegates within the House of Delegates is to make any necessary alterations to bylaws. One of the big ones that has been something we've been talking about for a while at the House of Delegates is what to do about American students who are attending foreign schools who right now are losing their representation within our House of Delegates due to losing the percentage that they need in order to have an active chapter of the student AVMA. Basically, it was previously required that you had to have 60% of your student body as a member in order to have a delegate, and they just amended that, they being the AVMA Executive Board, to state that not only did you have to attain 60%, but that you had to maintain it. And for schools like Glasgow, they have dipped below 60%, and so their delegate is not going to be able to be on the floor of the House of Delegates this year at the student House of Delegates. And we're trying to find a way to figure out what to do for the students who are American citizens, who will be returning, and who want to be able to convert to AVMA status when they graduate, but right now they don't have a chapter for them to go through. The other things that are important responsibilities of the House of Delegates is to make rules and regulations for their conduct of business, and they are the representative body for the chapter and associate members of the student AVMA. Obviously, as our delegates are representatives for us in the chapter, each of the delegates is responsible for that for their own school. So they communicate their membership's needs to the executive board so that decisions can be made in the House of Delegates, or anything that needs to be brought before the executive board of the AVMA can be brought forth by Elise Ackley. They also vote on any matters that are brought forth in the House of Delegates. This is a bit of a formal routine that they have discussion and then they make cast their votes, and also have to approve committee meeting minutes after their House of Delegate sessions are closed. So moving on to an overview of the AVMA governance. They also have their own executive board. This is made up of 15 voting members, and I'll break that down for you here. You have your president-elect, your president, immediate past president, then you have your vice president, your treasurer who does not have a vote, your HAC chair does not have a vote, the student AVMA president who does not have a vote, and 11 district directors. They represent various areas within the United States. The executive vice president, as I said before, presides over the student House of Delegates along with the student AVMA president. And their House of Delegates is a little bit different. They have one delegate and one alternate from each state and allied association. And then they have 7 committees as well. And then you have a board of governors. They help to approve and also nominate members to be in items like the councils, task force, and committees and trusts that also help advise the executive board and the decisions that they make. So we went over this, who makes up the executive board and the House of Delegates. There's they set association policies, which is really important. This can be a little bit of a long process because they only meet twice a year and they do have a lot of things to discuss. So they meet at the AVMA convention and at the AVMA leadership conference. There is a House Advisory Committee, or HAC. They have 7 members that are elected by the House of Delegates. They make recommendations to the House of Delegates and Executive Board on any decisions that they are going to be making. And they review and approve the credentials for members of the Executive Board and councils, as I stated before. So the AVMA did a poll a little over a year ago to get member feedback, and one of the major things that they found was that the members did not feel the AVMA was doing an adequate job of representing veterinarians at large. So the AVMA created a committee whose purpose was to try and find a model that was going to meet the needs of the AVMA constituents. And this last year they proposed their best model. One of the things that they decided was that the AVMA really needs 5 key things. It needs to be transparent, nimble, engaging, accountable, and knowledge-based. And in order to make these things a reality, they felt that the best way to build the new governance was based on this 4 pillars idea. So they are proposing that there be no more House of Delegates. Instead, they want to have a veterinary issues forum. And the veterinary issues forum is kind of essentially like a very fancy and professional chat room, kind of. The idea is that veterinarians would no longer go through a delegate in order to have their thoughts and ideas heard by the AVMA. Instead, they would write in directly, and that this information would be surveyed and brought before the executive board and other appropriate people. They also want there to be a board of directors, which is basically equivalent to the current executive board, advisory councils, and then a volunteer resources committee. And this volunteer resources committee is also really key to what they're hoping to create. The general concerns that were brought forth was that they felt that the House of Delegates should not have allied organizations represented, that only the members of the AVMA should have a vote. And basically, it's kind of set up right now where it's kind of like the House of Delegates in that if you get the right groups together and aligned on an issue, they're going to be able to get that issue passed or not passed, even if that is not what the majority of veterinarians are wanting because of the weight that they have. They also want to have more consistent term limits for delegates. That's one of the things that they didn't like about the current setup, and currently they felt that the AVMA members didn't really have necessary power to remove delegates that are doing a poor job. So they also want there to be a more transparent process for finding new veterinarians to be volunteers within the AVMA committees, because that would make it so that more people who want to be involved will be able to do so. And also that currently, in order to attain a position in the AVMA, it's a very, very long process. And by limiting that process, we could have younger veterinarians who are really motivated to be involved now. So here's an overview that I put together of what this model would look like. So there would be the Volunteer Resources Committee, their main job being finding people to work in committees and councils, and also find individuals to run for the board of directors. The Veterinary Issues Forum is over here. As I explained before, that is where they will be receiving input from veterinarians at large who want to be involved. We have the Council on Education, which is responsible for accrediting schools. It's pretty important. You'll still have the Executive Vice President. They would still be involved in the student AVMA. The advisory councils would help limit the number of councils that are working at any given time, and then of course support staff. So the advisory councils, they want to limit the number that there are. They feel like right now there are too many councils going in the current governance model, and some of their work is overlapping, and that's not a very good use of time or funds. So they want to limit it to these 6 pillars. They want one for animal welfare and ethics, another for economics and practice, one on education, one on governmental and external relations, one on scientific activities, and one on membership and governance. And basically the way that this model is going to work best is on what they call concentric circles. What they want to see happen is they want to have advisory councils working, and these are people who are going to have the most hands-on time dedicated to working on things within the AVMA. These are people who probably aren't practicing as much on a daily basis, and they're helping organize things. Then in the next group of people, you have consultants that can be sought out to find out information about a particular topic, task force that are working to try and solve a particular problem or find information, and also small working groups. They are not dedicating quite as much time as the advisory councils, but they're still very involved. So they're called the busy experts. And then finally, interested bystanders, this outer loop. This is a little bit different, and what they're hoping is that the forum will allow people to comment and make opinions and make arguments within the AVMA who are not necessarily in a position where they're able to meet several times a year and work on a task force or on an advisory council, but that they can still be involved in organized veterinary medicine and the AVMA. So the board of directors that they're proposing would be responsible for seeking, obtaining, and utilizing advice to make knowledge-based decisions. And the terms that they want them to have are staggered 3-year terms where they can run for a second term, and the president-elect would be elected each year. So they would still, as they are now, go for being a president-elect, president, immediate past president. And then for nominations, that's where the Volunteer Resources Committee comes in. They want to seek out 2 candidates for each election, because they want for there to not be any more uncontested elections, so that people have a choice, and just to also try and make sure that we're finding a diverse group of people to represent the AVMA. It's really important to them to find diversity, and diversity doesn't mean only in gender or in ethnicity. It also means within background, on where they come from in medicine and policy, so that we can get a broad group of individuals who are thinking in different ways to be working for the AVMA. Allied groups can nominate them, and there can also be write-in nominations, which is nice. And then the Volunteer Resources Committee, those individuals would have staggered 2-year terms. They could be renewed once. Past board members could be on the Volunteer Resources Committee, but they would have to be off the executive, or not the executive board, but the board for at least 2 years before they can be eligible to be on the Volunteer Resources Committee. Basically, the idea behind setting things up this way is to make sure that people aren't nominating their friends to run for the board. And the other thing that they're doing to make veterinarians at large more involved and to do their best to remove any sort of bias is that they want 9 members of this Volunteer Resources Committee to be selected by the board of directors, but then 6 of the members would be selected by veterinarians at large. So it wouldn't all be folks who were nominated by the board of directors. Then the Veterinary Issues Forum, as I discussed before, is that online means of giving feedback. And the purpose of this is to do some environmental scanning. They want to try and figure out what upcoming issues are and be involved in that before it becomes a big issue, and look at things early, and also give people more ready access to leadership and being represented, and also hopefully lead to a road of potentially becoming a leader within the AVMA, and then also to provide for networking and ceremonial functions. So this is something that they're going to be talking about, whether or not they're going to be changing the governance next month in February. If you want to weigh in on whether or not the AVMA should change to that governance model that I just explained to you, you can go here on the AVMA website and provide your feedback. I hope that this has been helpful and that you will take a couple minutes to give us some feedback. I'm hoping that if we do this in the future instead of written meeting minutes, that this is something you could listen to while you were doing something else, some normal around the house chores. We know that you guys are very busy, and any time that you can maximize how many things you can get done at once, that's excellent. So hope this was helpful, and hope you'll provide us some feedback. Thanks, and have a great day, guys. Bye.